It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Beware the Ides of March. Donald Trump effectively gives notice on Volodymyr Zelensky to quit, and the Vice President J.D. Vance has an even more somber warning. Zelensky will regret, he says, bad-mouthing President Donald Trump. And the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer runs into serious political trouble, not in Parliament, but in the country, over his plan to send 10,000 British soldiers into the maw, into the carnage, into the valley of death, which would indeed be the case. We'll be talking about Britain, about America, about Russia, and about Ukraine. But we won't be forgetting Palestine. Never. That, I promise you. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Nothing could more aptly illustrate the Grand Canyon between Europe and the United States than the attack made by the American President Donald Trump and the Vice President J.D. Vance on little Volodymyr Zelensky. According to President Trump, the leader of the NATO military alliance and the leader of the country that has shouldered the vast majority of the financial burden in supporting the Zelensky regime, and the leader of the country that would be expected to shoulder the burden of any NATO all-out war against Russia. He calls Zelensky a dictator, a moderately successful comedian, which admittedly is overstating it a bit. This is a man that can play the piano with his penis, after all. Not Trump, but Zelensky. I've heard that Trump couldn't, but let's not go there. He called Zelensky a thief. He said that he'd robbed hundreds of billions of dollars from the American taxpayer. He's going to be dodged. And I've come up with my own idea for a dodge in the United Kingdom, which we very badly need. Thanks, Mr. Musk, for the model that you have provided, although ours will be called DOSH, Department of State Honesty. But going back to the main subject, a dictator, a thief, a man who apparently tricked the United States into a war which need never have been fought and which Zelensky nor Europe is able to end. Only the man you've been bad-mouthing over the last couple of days, Donald Trump, can end this war. J.D. Vance went further in remarks reported in the British mass-selling Daily Mail. He says that Zelensky will regret bad-mouthing Donald Trump and denounces his atrocious response to the prospect of peace talks. I predicted to you long ago, but let me do so again. I know schadenfreude is something our mothers would have told us to avoid. Taking pleasure in the misfortune of others is never a good look, but let me predict all over again. Zelensky will soon be in that alleyway, filled with used prophylactics and redundant US-backed dictators. It's an ugly alleyway, no matter how much money you have been able to steal. That's if Zelensky manages to get out in time. If I were him, I would read the writing on the wall. Hello, darkness, my old friend, it says. You are doomed, Zelensky. However, that's not how it looks in the European Union. In the British Parliament today, you know, I always describe the two sides of the British Parliament as two cheeks of the same arse, but there's a bit in the middle, if you'll forgive me. And that bit is Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. The two cheeks, Badenoch, Starmer, and the bit in the middle, Ed Davey, are all still gung-ho for Vladimir Zelensky and are still denouncing President Donald Trump. It's going to be an interesting meeting. I'd like to be a fly on the wall when Sir Keir Starmer turns up at the White House, hoping that the security staff will recognize who he is. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting, because Great Britain has turned into the most visceral, snarling, ugly poodle that it is possible to imagine. It has turned against its master. It's seeking to bite the ankles of the man who feeds it. And it is distinctly obvious that the attempt to declare war on Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump at the same time is entirely doomed. Let's take the issue of the British 10,000, the gallant, that are going to be asked to ride on and on into the valley of death, just like the Scots Guards at the Battle of Balaclava in the charge of the Light Brigade. They were all doomed, they were all slaughtered, and so will the 10,000 that Keir Starmer intends to send to Ukraine. And if I were not a patriot, I would welcome it. If I did not care about the lives of our soldiers, I would welcome it. But as I am and I do, I cannot welcome it. Therefore, I declare war upon it. I declare war upon the idea that of all the countries in Europe and all the countries in North America, the only patsy that will go on reinforcing the failure of the Zelensky presidency will be my own country. I cannot accept the blood of my own armed forces being shed for that little sniveling, coke-sniffing thief that is Volodymyr Zelensky. I will not accept it, and even more, because the leading general in the British Army this day said that the only way that we can intervene in the war in Ukraine will be to immediately reintroduce conscription into the British Armed Forces. That's because 4,700 more people left the British Armed Forces last year than joined. That's because we have only 87,000 soldiers, and only half of them can possibly be described as frontline combat troops, and of that half, 25% are unavailable for duty for one reason or another at any one time. I will not allow to go unopposed the idea of perhaps a third of Britain's fighting forces being sent to the chiseling crook Zelensky. And I promised Keir Starmer last night, I do so again here tonight. If you try to introduce conscription in Britain, we will lead and organize the biggest mass movement that Britain has seen since the 1980s, the movement that destroyed the poll tax and brought down the premiership of the then apparently unassailable Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. The day that the first flag-draped coffins of British boys coming home from a new Crimea war will be the day that your political career is ended forever, Keir Starmer. Heed me on this. Don't do it. Mind you, after the heavyweight champion of world diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov, said this week that no NATO forces, however badged, however flagged, whether EU flagged or national flagged, no NATO forces will be allowed to enter Ukrainian territory. If they do, they will be immediately attacked with extreme prejudice. You might have thought that that would have stopped Keir Starmer in his tracks. But no, today he said, we're going to fly RAF Typhoon aircraft from Polish bases to patrol Ukraine's airways. Well, if that happens, the Typhoons will be shot from the skies. The Polish bases that they're taking off from will be Oroshenked. They will be struck with devastating force, and there will be no Article 5 protection, no NATO solidarity involved. Just in case any of you out there are misreading Donald Trump's signals and think that Article 5 of the NATO treaty even exists anymore, it will not exist for sure in an unauthorized, unilateral British attempt to join the war on the side of Zelensky. So don't do it. I warn you, Premier Keir Starmer, it will be the death of you before we'll allow the death. Zelensky's Ukraine is not worth the bones of a single British grenadier, and we will oppose you until our last breath. But back to the big picture. The extraordinary meeting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia this week between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio, it is now clear, set a course for the ending of this war. And as Rubio said, the end of sanctions against Russia. Of course, I'm not expecting those sanctions against Russia to end in the United Kingdom. Well, we've been hating on Russia since the middle of the 19th century. We ain't going to stop now. So no British company can dream of doing business in the booming Russian market. Forget it. The French and the Italians are already on their way in. The Americans will be on their way in. You turn if you want to, says Donald Trump. But if you don't, we will take the deals. And that's what's going to happen when the sanctions end, as they must end, according to the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, with the end of the war. So you'll be able to get RT in America, but you probably won't be able to get it in the United Kingdom. The truth is that the plan of the Russian and American spokespeople is still some way from a conclusion. But the rough outline of it looks like this. There will have to be presidential elections in Ukraine after a ceasefire, with all forces remaining in place at the point they have reached by the declaration of the ceasefire. The next step will be a presidential election in Ukraine. Russia's position is that it will not negotiate with Zelensky, and Zelensky has already declared he will not negotiate with Russia. In fact, he passed a law to make it illegal for him to negotiate with Russia. In any case, his presidential term has now long elapsed. He is an illegitimate president, or as Donald Trump called him today, he is a dictator who has banned the opposition parties, who has exiled or imprisoned opposition politicians, who has placed his main rival under house arrest in Kiev in preparation for charges against him of corruption. And the idea that Zelensky, as a dictator, unelected, with 4% approval rating in the country, according to Donald Trump, can win a presidential election is, of course, entirely fanciful. So Russia will sit down under the shadow of the demise, political demise, one hopes, of Zelensky, and will seek to find light in negotiations with a new president of Ukraine. All territories liberated by the Russian army will remain Russian. All territories which are Russian-speaking territories, which are ethnically Russian territories, will be a part of Novorussia. And I do hope and I do believe that that will include the Russian jewel in the crown, the great city of Odessa, of which I have such fond memories from my personal experience in former times. And then government will emerge in Kiev, which is demilitarized, which is declared officially neutral, which can join no alliances or pacts, and which will establish effective neutrality, hopefully friendship, with all of its neighbors. Could be a profitable little number, that, you know, to be the bridge between the East and the West, to be the bridge in trade and commercial terms between Russia and the others. If a wise government comes to power in Ukraine, I hope that it will recognize that. But that will be the end of the war, and it will be the end of the sanctions, whatever Keir Starmer and the civil servants in Whitehall pretend to believe at this moment. Only time for me to turn to the area where Trump ain't doing anything like as good. We have a situation now where an American brokered ceasefire in the Lebanon has been broken more than 1,500 times by Israel, with the wholesale slaughter of hundreds of civilians, most of them women and children, as usual, and where the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon is declared in the Western media to have been completed, but in fact, the Israelis have left 5 armed fortresses inside Lebanon, posing a major dilemma to the pro-American, indeed American hand-picked president of Lebanon. Is he really going to allow Israel to occupy 5 fortresses inside Lebanon? Well, if he does, the Lebanese resistance will have to remove them themselves, and on past form, they'll probably do that in pretty short order. But what will the result of that be? Will it be a resumption of Israel's war against Lebanon? And if so, what will Donald Trump do about that? What will Donald Trump do about the decision by the Israeli government to seize the churches and property of the Armenian Christian community in Holy Jerusalem, in the very place where Jesus was crucified. What will Donald Trump's evangelical base say about this seizure by something calling itself the Jewish state, seizing ancient Christian property in the Armenian Quarter, known throughout the whole world and for millennia as the Christian Quarter of Jerusalem? It's about to be seized by Netanyahu's gang and settled with Israeli Jewish settlers. What will Donald Trump do about the fact that the occupied West Bank of the River Jordan is currently the state of widespread carnage, huge numbers of casualties, again mainly women and even babies, murdered in the West Bank by settlers and by Netanyahu's murder gang in the Israel occupation force? What is Donald Trump going to do about any attempt by Netanyahu to drive millions of Palestinian cities over the River Jordan into the Hashemite kingdom? Is he going to allow that to happen using American weapons and American money? And how is he going to explain that to the blinking, plainly terrified Hashemite king who sat with him in the Oval Office just the other day? And finally, what is Donald Trump going to do about Gaza? He has not actually repeated, at least in the last 72 hours, the cockamamie idea that he is now the owner of Gaza. You'll recall he said he was going to buy it. Buy it from whom, I asked. The people who own Gaza are not sellers. They won't sell, whatever the price. Even if it's their own deaths, they will not sell it. So he dropped the idea of buying Gaza and merely declared that he now owned it, presumably to build a Trump Tower, presumably to build some casinos and condominiums in the Donald Trump fashion and style. But him and whose army? Are the American army going to invade and occupy Gaza? How do you think that will work out, Donald? And when the first American casualties are arriving back with all state honors, having died in the building of a new Trump Tower hotel, how do you think that's going to look to your electoral base? All of this coming up in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes, because this is the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned. Big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'm really going to make this point as firmly as I can. Every one of you has to go to MOATS.tv and donate something, even if it is £1, even if it is $1, €1. Nothing comes for free. 2 shows a week cannot be produced for free. We need every person watching to donate at least £1, $1, €1. I can't put it more clearly than that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, we're breaking yet another record. The last show was the biggest ever live audience. And this show is even bigger. This is the mother of all talk shows. And this is the mother of all talk shows regular quiz. It is a poll. Should the British Army be sent to Ukraine? 33,560 people have voted already. Please get your vote in by about quarter to the end of the show. And if you want to call the show, it's toll free in the United States and Canada on +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Now, all over the Western world, there has been a witch hunt of professionals of all kinds, actors, actresses, singers, doctors, and other professionals, for having a point of view in support of the Palestinian people during what the highest court in the world has described as a genocide. You would have thought that the witch hunt would have been against those who were perpetrating genocide, but no. There's a long, long list of people who've been suspended from their jobs, sacked from their jobs, demoted in their jobs, arrested, had their arms broken. One of our friends got her arm broken by Greater Manchester Police just last evening, and I'd like to hear further and better particulars about that. In ordinary times, I might have sent her to my first guest to have her broken arm mended. He is Dr. Nadeem Haddadin, who was an NHS doctor for 15 years and has been suspended for his posts on Twitter on the Gaza genocide. He's one of many, but we need to hear his story. Dr. Nadeem, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Let's begin by hearing from you. What exactly happened to you?
Thanks for having me, George. And as you say, yeah, this is something that's happening to far too many people. So I've been a doctor in emergency and acute medicine for about 15 years for the NHS, with about 90% of that time spent working at the Royal Free Hospital in northwest London. In fact, serving one of the best, biggest Jewish communities in London, if not in the country. And I am of British Jordanian heritage. 90% of my family live in Jordan. And anybody who has family in Jordan, anybody who's born in Jordan, anybody from that part of the world has a very strong ingrained passion for the rights of the Palestinian people. And those feelings for those rights have been a very important part of me for as long as I can remember. They didn't appear in the last, year and a half, or certainly since October the 7th, the year before last. I arrived to work on the 14th of August last year, and I was doing my ward round as I would normally do. And I received an email from the responsible officer at the trust, which basically said, some concerns have been raised and you are suspended with immediate effect. There was no explanation as to what the concerns were, why I'd been suspended. But essentially I had to go around the department asking, other colleagues, consultants, if they knew what I'd done wrong. And I think you would hear from anybody else in that situation. As a doctor, your first instinct is to think, who have you brought to harm? Has there been some medical case that the General Medical Council hasn't told you about, or it hasn't yet come to, to fruition or come to light that you've harmed somebody? So I ended up sort of tootling home like a naughty schoolboy, feeling broken, for want of a better word, having to call the GMC and say, have I done something that I don't know about? They didn't have anything on file. And then I was invited to what was described as an informal meeting the next day with the responsible officer and the head of HR, which to me was not very informal at all. And I was prepared for a 2 or 3 week formal investigation because of a complaint that had come through anonymously about posts about the conflict that were potentially upsetting. I wasn't allowed to see the posts. I couldn't confirm that it was my ex account. I wasn't privy to the specifics of the complaint. But despite being told I was going to go through a formal investigation that would potentially lead me to a GMC investigation or dismissal, I was encouraged to delete my posts, which I thought was weird, given that they were going to investigate me. And then when I contacted them to say, look, I've deleted the posts while I was waiting for more information on the investigation, they did a complete U-turn and said, well, you've deleted your account now, you can come back to work, which I tried to do. I tried to return back to work for a couple of shifts, but just felt this utter sense of resentment towards an unknown colleague who might have reported me, or really this kind of lack of respect for the amount of time that I'd served there. So with all that in mind, certain things from that meeting were basically just ringing through my head constantly. The first was that the responsible officer suggested that as part of my investigation, I bring in an expert on the conflict to advise on what was acceptable. And I sort of sat there and said, are you asking me to provide a history lesson? Do you want me, should we stop this meeting now and we'll say, well, in 1948, or have you heard of the Nakba? Or do you understand that my family all live in Jordan? And not only is the impact going to be on the Palestinians, but very much potentially on my family. And beyond that, the trust has employed doctors, and I'm thinking of a specific doctor who has fled the conflict in Gaza. He was under siege at the Al-Shifa hospital for 60 days. He had a one-month-old child who he had to flee Gaza with his wife. And I was asked to look after that doctor because I had an empathy, I had a knowledge of the history, I had a sense of compassion and a feeling for the culture and an understanding that coming and working in this environment was going to be difficult. And he'd been through a trauma and needed to be looked after with respect and TLC. And yet I found myself sitting in a room where somebody was saying that they had an investigative panel who thought that they could act as the morality police to sit in front of me and tell me what I could and couldn't think about a massacre. And George, as you alluded to earlier, we have these, what I can only describe as Israeli lobbies within the United Kingdom, who think that all they need to do is say that one of us has had an opinion, and that opinion could make somebody feel upset or uncomfortable. And therefore, that means that we're not safe to practice medicine. And I need to tell those people out there that they have no right to make gross judgments on the way that we practice medicine, the way we have a respect for our careers, and the fact that we are not going to condemn indiscriminate killing and then stoop to a level so low that we would mistreat patients for any reason. I can tell you when I'm in A&E and I'm seeing 30, 40 patients and they're coming in every 10 minutes, I'm not standing there and assessing what their views are on the world or what their name is or where they might come from. And I would hope they're not doing the same for me. I'm thinking, tonsillitis, what do I do? This person's in pain, how do I fix them? And that's my whole job. And there are thousands of patients that have come past me in clinic or with an A&E or wherever, who we probably don't have matching morals or ethics or views on life, but it has nothing to do with our jobs. I've worked for 15 years. I haven't had a single complaint. And yet one anonymous complaint about some X posts suddenly means I have to be removed from my job. That is a disgrace.
It's Kafkaesque, in fact. It's even worse than I thought the story was. Let me, as it were, unpick it a little.
Sure.
The posts were said by a single anonymous complainant, to have been upsetting. What kind of a bar does that establish? Any doctor can be the subject of a single anonymous complaint about anything. Do the NHS, does the Royal Free Hospital suspend doctors and threaten them with potential dismissal on single anonymous complaints on any other matter?
So there's two things that I think are really important to say here. When the conflict was happening, or the invasion of Russia into Ukraine was happening, we all had our faces in Ukrainian flags on Facebook and X. We were wearing pins. We all had a sense that we had the same moral, ethical code of humanity, and we could say what we wanted. And nobody was calling us into offices saying, you might upset Russian patients. Nobody was saying that. Beyond that, hospitals are places of care, right? If you're a mechanic and you're fixing a car, when something goes wrong, the car breaks down. For us, human beings come to harm. And I know of many adverse clinical outcomes that have happened at the within A&E, within medicine, within the Royal Free. Some of them very, very public, serious clinical incidents. Did they lead to suspensions of medical staff? No. And in fact, when I did a Freedom of Information request at the Royal Free about suspensions of doctors in the last 5 years, I was one of only 2 doctors to be suspended for anything. So there is something about this topic which means that it trumps everything. It even trumps your medical practice. And what's interesting is that when I went back to the Royal Free and said, I'm taking you to an employment tribunal because I believe I've been discriminated against, and I can go into that a little bit further, I need an unredacted version of that complaint against me. It was such a strong defense as to why, their lawyer came back and said, well, if we do that, Nadeem could go out and harm them, that it makes me wonder who the NHS are protecting.
Wow. So where does this case lie now? What are you doing now about it?
So a very key piece of information sort of came across my desk, which was that a white British colleague contacted me to say that 6 weeks or so before I was suspended, he was dealt a legal paper by the Royal Free to say that a post he'd made about the conflict had been complained about, and that he was to sign a legal document to say that he would delete his posts and he would never post about the conflict again. Now, that complaint had come from a local Jewish GP, and then he'd also received a complaint from UK Lawyers for Israel. His concern was that to the responsible officer, I'd never met her in my life before. I was just Dr. Nadeem Haddadin Crow. I was, as an Arab with an Arab name, removed from work, threatened with suspension, whereas he was dealt much less severely. A piece of paper, sign this and say you'll never do it again. Both of which, by the way, I find phenomenally disgusting. Beyond that, there was no element of employment law or policy that was followed here. The informal meeting was not informal. I wasn't served a policy on how this, disciplinary procedure was going to go. It was all just, it felt made up as they went along. I filed a formal grievance on September the 1st. We're now on the 19th of February. They never answered the grievance. I filed for an employment tribunal and gave them the full month to go via early conciliation with ACAS. They ignored ACAS. And we are now, the 19th of February, and I'm now working with Lead A solicitors to take the Royal Free to an employment tribunal with our preliminary hearing in April on the basis that they'd followed no policy. And my feeling is that this is discrimination of a British Arab doctor who has the absolute right to care about my family, to care about the world and humanity. And I have no interest in operating at a lower moral standard to fit into the desires of the few or the NHS. And I felt that it was important that I put a face to my name for the very reason that all of these lobbies, they prey on fear. They love to dox people. They want people to think that they can ruin our lives, but they can't. And the reason that they want to take down doctors is that we're held as these people with a higher moral standing. They want to use that against us, as in, how do these people of moral standing, how can they not see it our way? What they need to understand is that we are people with higher moral standing. We have good levels of intelligence and awareness. And because of that, our opinions are a threat to them, and they want to take us down. Our opinions have weight, and they don't want those opinions that have that weight in the public sphere.
Well, the whole audience will be completely behind you. Is there anything that the public can do to support you in this quest?
We are running something called a crowd justice page, where we're raising money to fund the legal case. The Royal Free is a government-funded organisation that will have hundreds of thousands of pounds that it'll be absolutely prepared to waste on an employment tribunal rather than just taking this on the chin. If people want to support, if they could go to the Crowd Justice website and search my name, Dr. Nadeem Crowe, Crowe, or go to my Instagram handle or my X handle, they'll be able to support the Crowd Justice page. Even if you pledge £1 and leave a comment, it just shows that people are on our side. And the NHS can't afford to lose doctors. I've moved into the private world now, having, worked for years, loved working for the NHS, because NHS England went as far as defending what had happened to me, defending the Royal Free. I've got more self-respect than to go back to them as an employer. So we need your support, both financially and also so that the NHS understands that you are there standing for us, and that in fact you do know that we're safe. And the reason that we're speaking for Gaza is that we care about people, we care about life, and that has absolutely no bearing on the way that we practice medicine or treat patients. We believe everybody deserves free, fair, and high standard healthcare. And these vexatious accusations are just that. They're bullying and they're harassment and no more.
Brilliant, Doctor. I wish you every success and hope all of our audience will help you in any way that they can. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Nadeem Haddadin, NHS doctor, now in the private sector because of a Kafkaesque witch hunt over tweets about Gaza that he made. One complaint, anonymous complaint, has led to all of this. God damn these people. I'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Should the British Army be sent to Ukraine? Yes or no? Vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. Vote on my Twitter, my X. Vote on the YouTube community poll or on the YouTube stream. If you are watching us on the YouTube stream, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and give your thumbs up to the show. And why not share with your friends on YouTube? Should the British Army be sent to Ukraine? Yes or no? It's really a perfectly binary question. Let's see what David in Swindon wants to talk about. David, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
A couple of things, a couple of quick points. The documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, that's on BBC Two, on iPlayer. The Jewish press today has been going mental, saying that it's it's the grandson of some Hamas leader that narrates it. I don't know whether you've seen it or even a clip of it.
No, I haven't heard of it even.
No, honestly, you should watch this. How to Survive a War Zone, Gaza. It's a 13-year-old lad and his friends filming for 1 year. He's absolutely brilliant. He's articulate, but the Jewish...
Well, it won't be on the BBC for long. It won't be on the BBC for long if the lobby are already gunning for it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Honestly, watch it.
Well, look, it's up to us, David.
Yeah.
David, it's up to us.
Yeah.
Are we prepared to be bullied by a tiny sliver of the British population on this question? There's
Absolutely
a huge number of Jewish people in Britain who are on our side of this. There is a majority of there's only 220,000 Jews in Britain. A substantial number are with us on Palestine. That doesn't leave that many people as a proportion of the population of Britain. So we have to make up our mind. Are we going to be cowed, terrified, dictated to, sacked from our jobs, suspended? Are we going to allow them to dictate to us? I long ago decided I was not. I suspect you feel the same.
Now, our second favourite subject, again, going back to television this morning, who was doing the news rounds? Our old friend, Tobias Ellwood. He mentioned conscription. Yeah, Tobias Ellwood. He mentioned the Oxford debate. He mentioned conscription again, because that's a hot topic at the moment. And he was actually saying, somebody asked him a question, what do you mean by conscription? Well, everybody will have 8 months of training. Nobody said, well, who's going to train them? Where they're going to be put while they're being trained. And then he said, oh, well, they'll come back, we'll find some bases to do it. Like you said, we've only got 80,000 people. How are they going to train these people? It's mad, conscription.
Well, I mean, on one level, I feel like saying bring it on, because nothing will provide the comprehensive rejection of British state power like an attempt to conscript our young people to fight for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer. Yeah? Nothing will provoke the level and breadth of opposition like that move would provide. First of all, we'll discover that a substantial number of our young men have been sufficiently converted from toxic masculinity that soldiers they definitely won't make. Secondly, we'll discover that such is the visceral hatred for Keir Starmer that the idea of going off to die for him is so repugnant that it will provoke a revolution in this country. And I'll lead it. I promise you. I will lead a mass movement against conscription in this country, and I tell you, we will be millions strong. I promise you, David, in Swindon. Thank you very much for the call. Now, a big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. We depend on this now. I really mean this. We depend on this. If we're going to keep up 2 shows a week, we depend on this. So please, sometime tonight, go to the MOATS.tv website and donate even £1, $1, €1. It's not asking for much. Nothing comes for free. We can't keep this show going for free. 1. That's all I'm asking for. All of you give 1. But John Noble, Michael Barry, Rafik Kathwari, and Juan Carlos Lemieux Munoz have done a lot better than 1. And I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart. They're the top donors who visited the website this week. So please do become a donor. Click on the Donate Now button on the website, anywhere on the site, and donate whatever you can afford. Let's go to Trevor in Cambridgeshire on Trump and Palestine. Go ahead, Trev.
Good evening, Jules. Thank you for taking my call again. First of all, as an ex-British soldier, absolutely no way at all should any British soldiers be sent anywhere near Ukraine. It's a dying cause, and it's been dying for the last since its inception. But and as for conscription, I've got a 21-year-old son. I would die rather than let him go off to some futile battle like this. But on the subject that I called for, and Trump's ownership of Gaza, as he put it, I think a very important detail has been missed regarding this rhetoric. First of all, this US owning of Gaza is the antithesis of Trump's election promises to cut spending on military and on the budget, and to cut overseas entanglements, and to bring the soldiers back to look after the homeland, if you like. So it makes no sense at all. But what I think he did do, I think he surprised Netanyahu on stage. If you look at Netanyahu's responses as Trump was announcing this ownership, I think he was shocked. As a skilled politician, he kind of hid it. But I think it was an announcement that he wasn't aware of. But what he's done, effectively, Netanyahu, is on that stage, he didn't deny the ownership proposition from Trump. In a fireside chat, he had the opportunity to deny it and didn't deny it. And then he made a statement from his own premises, and I'll quote from Netanyahu. He says, "We all welcome President Trump's demand for the release of our hostages by Saturday noon. And this is the important part. And we all welcome the president's revolutionary vision for the future of Gaza, thus making Gaza a transactional, a deal, a financial enterprise, and not a biblical birthright for any creed, be it Jewish or Palestinian or Arab or whatever." So I think he's been caught in a trap, and obviously this will take the power away from the Christian Zionists in the Republican Party, and make it easier for Trump to get votes on other things. What do you think about that, George?
Well, I think that you've got a point. I think it's an interesting thesis. I think I was one of the first to point out that Netanyahu did not, to me, look happy when Trump announced this crazy plan, because, of course, it's his contention that this Gaza land belongs to Israel. Well, now it doesn't belong to Israel. It belongs to Donald Trump and the United States of America. And you've just heard it on the stage, standing alongside him, and you have not defied it. Secondly, if the American title to Gaza is to be taken seriously, well, clearly Netanyahu cannot resume the mass genocidal destruction of it. After all, this is Trump's property now. You can't be bombing it with American bombs. You can't bomb American property with American bombs. There are certain conundrums that are thrown up by the whole affair. I, on balance, believe that it's another crazy Trump idea. It's another of those ideas that just in a kind of rush of blood to the head come out of his mouth, because it is so illegal, it is so undoable, it is so counterproductive that it could only boost support for the Palestinian cause all over the world, everywhere in the world, including all the former satraps of Western Europe, would have to oppose it, root and branch, because their own citizens could take them to court in their own countries if they were in any way to facilitate it. Because, as was very recently underscored by the ICJ, Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem are occupied Palestinian territories, illegally occupied Palestinian territories. And you can't buy something that is illegally occupied by somebody else and expect that to pass muster in the courts, any courts. Now, I know the ICJ ain't much of a court, as it turns out, any more than the ICC is any kind of international criminal court, but the domestic courts are. The French court, the Italian court, the British courts could not countenance a situation where a British government was acting in support of such a blatantly illegal act. And there would be potential consequences that would be serious of that. Trev, thanks for the call from England, Cambridgeshire. Now, you can leave comments on YouTube. Just scan the QR code now and leave a comment on the YouTube stream, and we'll try and read it out. Natalie H. says, if Trump could only treat criminals like Netanyahu the way he treats his puppet, Zelensky. And Bass Ninja says, NHS staff work in an environment where if they say anything against the current grain, they get sacked. Mine Kara says, outrageous by the Royal Free, which, by the way, has taken over the running of 4 London hospitals. Thank you for that. I didn't know that. Z.A. Lucasaid says the Christian Zionists were formed by British Jonathan Darby in 1900, way before the Zionist movement in 1897. I presume you must mean 1800 then. Balfour was a member. They were the real lobby. Just clarify that, Z.A., if you will, because it's an interesting comment. Otto Calvo says, as usual, the professor is on fire. Great lecture again. Thank you from Norway. Thank you, Otto. Here is Declan from Ireland, from Dublin, on Trump. Declan, welcome to the show.
George, I don't know whether to laugh or to cry with what's going on, but Christoph Heusen, Heusgen, who's one of Germany's top diplomats and who chaired the Munich security conference there a couple of days ago, burst out crying like, you know, the proverbial little baby on the stage. And he's supposed to be the character leading the charge against Russia. A couple of years ago, he laughed directly when he was German ambassador to the United Nations into Trump's face, but he's not laughing now. If we move on from that, but he's typical of all these Irish, English, German, French, etc. non-entities that we're stuck with, you know, and these are the people who want fisticuffs with Russia. But if we move on from that, these talks are a big win for Saudi Arabia. And if you remember, Trump said, talking about your Prime Minister, that Saudi Arabia buys a lot of hardware from America. What does Britain do for America? Nothing like Saudi Arabia. So again, the pendulum is moving eastwards, in this case towards Saudi Arabia. The next thing I want to say is the Royal Navy, like the German Navy, has more admirals than it has ships and more generals than it has tanks. So, you know, good luck. Good luck in Donbass.
Well, I don't know. I've seen King Charles. I've seen King Charles with a very fancy military uniform on, and actually bent double with the weight of the medals on his breast. Why can't we send him? He could lead the charge of the gallant into the valley of death. Declan, thanks for that brilliant call. Now, it was a record week for the podcast, so I'm very glad that you're enjoying it so much. We're now in the top 20 in Egypt, Bulgaria, and Morocco this very week, and we've held our position in the charts in Israel too, which is astonishing, you might think. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. But you can also listen to the weekly podcast via the moats.tv website when you're leaving your donation to keep the show going. There's a legend on the line. Got to take him before the break. It's the legend in Glasgow, Sarkar on Starmer. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Thank you so much, George, for taking my call. George, I must say something, George. What I'll discuss right now, you'll think it's some dystopian fantasy. We have a Pound Shop Tony Blair. Pound Shop Tony Blair by the name of Keir Starmer, who happens to be our Prime Minister, who wants to take us to a war with Russia. Just imagine this, George. We don't have enough army to recruit. We cannot take care of our own armed forces who went and fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our Navy, which used to be the pride of our country, is in doldrums. On top of that, war costs money, and we have the most amazing Chancellor who's stopping businesses from making money, shutting down businesses, putting tax on farmers, making sure everyone, people who don't even earn income, they cannot afford their heating. War costs money, war costs lives, and our Prime Minister wants to go and pick up a fight with, of all countries, Russia. In Europe, he just doesn't seem to get it. People are playing him. That guy, that German guy who was crying, his country's chancellor, he knows his days are numbered. He's keeping his mouth shut. He knows I don't want to put my German troops in Russia. Oh, we have a great history with Russia when last time Germans fought over there. What is the problem with our Prime Minister? Our country, we cannot even predict our own
I'll tell you what I suspect. I'll tell you what I suspect, Sarkar. He saw the depth of the doldrums in which Mrs. Thatcher was trapped after the first recession of her premiership. There were, of course, 2 serious recessions in her premiership, but after the first one, she was given a lifeline by the Argentine dictator Galtieri, who invaded a crop of rocks in the South Atlantic called the Falkland Islands. And Mrs. Thatcher seized on that moment as a kind of lifeline to rescue her fading premiership that might well have ended in 1983 at the general election that year. And she took a big gamble because Britain was at the limits of its ability, even then, 45 years ago nearly, to put together a task force. We could not do it now. We have not the assets to make another task force like we did in 1982 in the Falklands War. But she took a big gamble and did it, and it paid off. Of course, she was fighting a straw man. The poor Argentine conscripts were not ready to fight for the dictatorship which sent them there. They gave up the fight in pretty short order, though not before. A lot of fine British sailors went to Davy Jones' locker under fire from missiles that had been supplied to the Argentine dictatorship by our good friend France, and using military equipment given to the Argentine dictatorship by our good friend Israel. But the British task force prevailed. Mrs. Thatcher's support ballooned, and she easily won the subsequent British general election in 1983. If I am any judge, that's what Starmer has in mind. The alert amongst the viewers will already have noticed some significant differences in going to war with Russia and going to war with the tin pot tyrants then in power in Buenos Aires. Thank you, Sarkar. Let me give you a poll update. 35,302 people have voted. On Telegram, 11% say yes, send the British Army to Ukraine. On the YouTube community poll, a vast number, 22,000 votes on that, 11% say yes. On the YouTube stream, 9% say yes. But here's the rub once again. On Twitter, on X, 51% say yes. You'll realize something is happening on Twitter. I'll talk about it after a short break, because right after that break, I've got one of our best ever guests, my good friend and colleague, Afshin Rattansi, the host of Going Underground, coming up right after this.
Hello, George. I heard Neil Kinnock commenting on you losing your seat, okay? I was disgusted and amazed at what he said. He was like an ignorant football supporter. He actually punched his fist in the air, saying he was delighted that you were gone, that you were a horrible person. That's the first thing he said. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was conniving morning, noon and night to kick you out of the party. Now, this is before Tony Blair, and you were in good standing with the Labour Party. Mr. Kinnock, that chap just totally disgusted me. So what I think the British have to do, and the Irish and everybody else, is they need a new conversation and stop drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I think all those people in British civil society, including Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Ken Livingstone, and very many more, have to have a conversation about how to wean the British and everybody else away from these Coca-Cola and Pepsi parties.
Nobody knows who Neil Kinnock is. Those who know who he is know he's the man from the Welsh Valleys that betrayed the miners. Frankly, the hatred of Neil Kinnock I wear not even as a badge of honour, a little tiny pin maybe, because pretty soon no one will have heard of him at all. But the wider subject that you raise is the important one. I don't know, Jeremy says he doesn't want to form a party. That's fine by me. I've got my own party. I'll be staying in it anyway. But what I would like him to do is to announce a new popular front, like the one that has just, I can tell you officially, won the French parliamentary elections.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Afshin Rattansi is one of the finest broadcasters on television anywhere in the world today. We used to see a lot of him, can't at the moment, thanks to sanctions that have been imposed upon him. But he'll be back. He's going to outlast those who banned him, those who accused him. He is still the host of one of the best shows anywhere, Going Underground, and I'm glad to say he joins us tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Afshin, welcome. Oh, I love that jacket. I want that jacket, Afshin, as soon as it's able to fit me.
It's vaguely optimistic, vaguely hopeful.
I'm on a diet, so maybe by around May month I'll fit it, in which case I hope you'll lend it to your good friend. Afshin, these are extraordinary times. And quite nearby where you are, an extraordinary summit took place just the other day. What's your take on it all?
I'm wearing the jacket because I recorded 2 shows just now, so I'm still in this get-up because of that. And people should watch Going Underground on Saturday and Monday, because we've got the Sarah Wagon Connect foreign affairs person. She's giving her take, and Ron Paul, who Elon Musk wants to head the Fed. But of course, it's all about what's been happening in Saudi Arabia. I haven't actually been sanctioned, I should say, George. And I don't think now I can be sanctioned. I just had to leave the country of my birth because they wouldn't allow me to do what I wanted to do, is to be a journalist. Although now you at MOATS and me at Going Underground, and I don't know, so many different outlets that were courageous enough to challenge the propaganda narrative, we're really American, aren't we? We're pro-American. They're going to have to get their heads around this fact that I actually said to the Sarah Wagen Connect, considered left-wing party in Germany contesting Sunday's Bundestag elections, you're the pro-American party. And I think some people are finding it difficult to, in their heads, understand that if you wanted peace and not World War III, you've now become a supporter of Washington policy. It's very difficult, isn't it, to even understand it, that all our lives, I mean, growing up in Britain, thinking of all those troops at all those US military bases that one saw as trying to prevent real democracy in our home country of Britain, because the threat was always there. They couldn't nationalize things. They couldn't democratize things in Britain because of the effect of Washington policy. If you lived in Italy, there'd be Operation Gladio. However, so many covert operations by the United States. And here we are now, hopefully thinking about real détente and Moscow and Washington united. And ironically, it was actually the elites of Europe, Western Europe. They were the enemy, not the Americans, not the Russians. It was just elite power in London and in Paris and Brussels and a newly unified Berlin. Who would have thought they were the enemy?
It is astounding. I'm going to make a prediction to you. You and I will be working together in the United States of America. It will be the safest place for us to work. It will be the freest place for us to work. Mark my words on that. And I'll be wearing your jacket. But the substance
and I should say you've got to change the theme. You've got to change the theme song. You've got to change the theme song to MOATS to the Star Spangled Banner, obviously.
I'm ready. I'm ready. In exchange for a green card, I'm ready. Now, Afshin, the substance of what was being discussed, we weren't there, we don't know, we're not party to either side of the negotiations, but it is fairly well leaked by authoritative people that the timetable they have in mind is a ceasefire followed by elections, followed by negotiations, with the ceasefire line being exactly as it is on the day that that ceasefire is called. Lavrov has made clear what the Russian negotiating position will be. That is to say that all of the Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian parts of Ukraine will be part of Novorossiya, the new Russia, perhaps vindicated or otherwise by referenda in all of these liberated areas, that Zelensky must have a presidential election for a whole raft of reasons, not the least of which is he's no longer the president. And if Donald Trump is to be believed, he doesn't stand much of a chance of re-election. So ipso facto, a new government in Kiev, which must agree as part of Russia's demands to be an entirely neutral country, not a part of any alliance or any pact. That means no EU, it means no NATO, and that by definition, it's going to have to be prepared to get along with all of its neighbors, including its most influential one, that of Russia next door. Is that how you see the end of these negotiations, or at least the beginning of them?
I mean, Russia has won what it sought out to do. Those areas that were independent in the east of Ukraine will no longer be persecuted and bombed by the Nazis of Ukraine and so on. But actually, this story is changing, isn't it, minute by minute, because Trump's Truth Social post in the past hour or so, which was then retweeted by J.D. Vance, the vice president, who, of course, excoriated Europe for not having free speech, therefore no real democracy. And I should actually just say, it's weird in England. People are saying, Churchill, he didn't have elections during the Second World War. I didn't listen to your monologue. Perhaps you might have touched on it. Churchill didn't ban the opposition Labour Party when there was a unity government in Britain during the war. Yes, elections were postponed in Britain, but he didn't ban the opposition Labour Party, or he didn't ban all publications of anything in opposition to the war effort, as far as I understand it. So there's no comparison there with dictator Zelensky, as Trump has put on his Truth Social post. And we've got to remember that he's being fed information now by Lieutenant Colonel Tulsi Gabbard. That's why we're starting to understand he's getting some information now from his Director of National Intelligence. And we mustn't forget she is on a death list from Ukrainians. And as part of the things you itemize there, it's now emerged that Elon Musk, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, who has been threatened on his own platform by Ukrainian activists. I know there are death lists on servers, perhaps in Virginia. I think you're on it, George, for opposing the Nazis of Ukraine. It seems that Elon Musk has just put out on his platform that he will be auditing the money sent by the American Treasury, the American people, to Zelensky in the first place. So that's going to be part of it. But of course, what should be part of it, and Vladimir Putin presumably is aware of this, something could happen to Donald Trump at any moment. There have been assassination attempts already. He's been shot at. This could change on a dime. So there have to be structures there that if Donald Trump is assassinated, if members of his team are, that there are structures there to ensure the process continues regardless of him. And there has to be some Nuremberg-style trials. I mean, surely Macron, Scholz, Starmer, they can't be allowed to go scot-free. There are 1 million, perhaps, killed Ukrainians. They were killed because they would not pursue negotiations. Zelensky made it illegal in October 2022 to pursue peace negotiations. All those European leaders need to be brought to some kind of justice for the death toll in Ukraine, the numbers killed in Ukraine because they refused negotiations with Russia and indeed had their own process without Russia in Switzerland, bizarrely.
Yeah, of course, Trump can be assassinated. He almost was struck on the ear, in fact. Funny we never hear anything about that case. Funny we don't know more about the kid that supposedly shot him and how he was able to get those shots away. But that's another matter. But it's much more likely that Zelensky will be assassinated. I mean, first of all, if you were in the Ukrainian power elite, you've now been told by President Trump and Vice President Vance that your leader is now effectively in a state of war with the only power on earth that has the means to do anything for Ukraine and to bring about any kind of end to this war that might save something for them. Vance says that Zelensky is going to regret bad-mouthing President Trump. And Trump says that Zelensky is a dictator. So if you were in the power circles in Ukraine, you might very well be saying, this guy is running out of road and we're going to have to change him. If I were Zelensky, I think I'd be on my way by the weekend, Afshin. I'm not sure even 2 weeks' notice has been given by the American leadership. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he actually was here in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and then he went to Turkey. But what happens to American puppets once they've outlasted their use by an administration in Washington? What happened to Saddam Hussein? What has happened to Osama bin Laden? What has happened to all these people, Noriega in Panama? What happens to them when they outlive their usefulness? He's in a very dangerous position. Perhaps there were rumors that Russia was protecting him, as far as I understand it previously, because some type of continuity in Kiev was important, because clearly Zelensky is not popular at home. He's opposed by loads of forces ranged against him within this divided and destroyed what was once Europe's largest country, Ukraine. It's been such a catastrophe. And that's why I think it's odd there's no talk of some kind of post-war justice already, allowing the kind of space to allow the kind of virus of propaganda to prosper in your continent, in Europe, of send troops. And I know you've already gone through and debated this absurd idea of conscription in Britain and so forth. It looks like Europe will fold. There's now talk, unsubstantiated by, is it in the German Bild newspaper, of possibilities of American withdrawal of troops from their bases in Western Europe established after the Second World War, although some are saying the ones established since 1990. Europe is isolated, and certainly I don't think European Secret Service agencies are going around protecting Zelensky. They don't care about Zelensky. They never have. I'm not sure what these elites ever really did care about, except serving Washington. And now they're just they're so disorientated. They don't know what to do. Although
Washington.
I noticed that your favorite foreign minister in Germany, whose name escapes me, who I've been talking about all day. I don't know why her name escapes me, but you pronounce her name so well. Baerbock has already done some kind of U-turn and said that the talks in Saudi Arabia were useful. I thought she said that Putin must be arrested and all the rest of it. Suddenly, so they will all twist around. It'll only be the particularly disorientated ones that won't realize, oh, we are vassal states. We have to take orders from Washington regardless of what they are. Take the order. Peace. Peace. Have peace. Do not have war. Stop.
I think they all will, Afshin. I think they all will, except the most disoriented one. And he happens, unluckily for you and me, to be our Prime Minister. It's difficult to see how he climbs back from his Charge of the Light Brigade declaration. And by the way, I should point out, he has the absolute support of the Conservative opposition. Kemi Badenough has said so this evening. And if they're the two cheeks of the same ass, the bit in the middle, Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats, they are all completely behind Keir Starmer's stand of sending 10,000 British soldiers,
and
marching them up.
And our newspapers, and our television channels, and our filmmaking studios, and our publishers, every aspect controlling the imaginations of the British public. So the polls showing they still support Zelensky, they hate Putin, all the rest of it. And I'm sure you're about to go on, Sir Keir Starmer is going to see Donald Trump next week, is it?
Yeah, I'd like to be a fly on the wall at that meeting. He's got to hope that he gets in. But the truth is, or the dog that has not barked, the shoe that has not dropped, is little Nigel Farage. Farage, the fierce opponent of the government and of the Conservative opposition, is completely silent on whether 10,000 troops should be marched up the top of the hill and sent into the Valley of Death. What can that mean?
Why does Donald Trump like Nigel Farage? Not really sure. Presumably because Trump does believe that the European Union was at its heart anti-democratic, which it was, and therefore Brexit was so important. But Nigel Farage has showed himself to be an utter lickspittle of American hegemonic power, just like the rest of them. If you just search Nigel Farage Ukraine, you'll see him attacking Russia, attacking Putin, just like Ed Davey. I know your international audience won't want to know the name of some Liberal Party leader in the British Parliament, let alone the Conservative Party leader or Starmer. So, the Reform Party have as much of a problem as the rest of them. In fact, obviously, I've got to ask, is it only your party, the Workers' Party, GB, that is in line with the United States and what the United States wants for this world?
We are the pro-American flag bearers now. Lastly, as you've been talking about all afternoon,
are you not sick and George? Are you not sick and tired of the anti-Americanism in our country? And it's about time they realize the United States is going to be the greatest country in the world.
I've always loved America, from California to the New York Islands. I have always loved America. I've got American blood in my veins. But as you've been talking about Germany all afternoon, can I just ask for a sneak preview? What do you think is going to happen in the German elections?
Chancellor Scholz was very quick, wasn't he, ahead of Sunday's Bundestag elections to say Starmer's plan was ridiculous. Quicker than Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, who looked as if she regretted appearing there, but then I guess the NATO Defense College is in Rome. It's difficult to see how Germany are going to react because of the vagaries of its own electoral system mean that we can't expect immediate action. They're as disoriented as the rest of them. I think the only thing that can really push the button on change in Germany, which we must remember has been horrifically hit in terms of the gap between rich and poor since the Biden CIA destruction of Nord Stream and the rise in inflation and energy prices. We've got to see that until those tens of thousands of American troops are withdrawn from German bases in Ramstein and Heidelberg and the rest, can Germany really act in any way that is independent of hegemonic power? It obviously can't. And for all our love of the United States, we must be very wary, and I know you are, and I actually was quite surprised of how much emphasis was given on our interview forthcoming on Going Underground with Ron Paul, who, as I said, was a pick for head of the Federal Reserve by Elon Musk. How worried someone like Ron Paul is, let alone the Sarawak Connect Alliance people contesting elections on Sunday, that for all the absence of a threat of imminent nuclear destruction and the death of all of us, how worried we all are about Gaza, about Palestine, and worried about possible wars on China and most imminently on Iran, because Iran has not followed up on its threat to retaliate for UK, US, EU armed bombing of Iran. They won't even admit that their president was assassinated in a helicopter. Is Iran really, has it got it what it takes right now? Because certainly Iran is the issue here. As for Western Europe, they wouldn't back, and Germany wouldn't back, presumably, the wars in the Middle East that may be erupting after the end of this conflict in Ukraine.
It's so complicated. We'll be cross-dressing. 1 minute we're pro-American, the next minute we're anti-American, the next minute I'm appearing in your beautiful jacket. You are a superstar. Afshin Rattansi, host of Going Underground, must watch by everyone. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a break. Your calls are next. Then Gayatri with the social media news roundup. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Okay, you've got about 15 minutes to get your vote in. Should the British Army be sent to Ukraine? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Please follow me on Telegram in any case. It may very well prove one day to be the last redoubt, although I might be working in California by then. You can vote on my X, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. 36,054 people have voted so far. And overwhelmingly, Keir Starmer, despite what the NAFO dogs on Twitter have to say, it is a big, overwhelming no. Let's take a call from David in South Wales on Keir Starmer. Go ahead, David.
Good evening, George. I hope you're well. It's nice to see the glint in your eye that I think you might have lost over the last couple of months. Nice to see you back.
Maybe it's been a tough time. David.
I just have an opinion about Keir Starmer and this conscription thing. I think he's just full of hot air. I think this is just a way to scramble the British Empire back because he realises now how insignificant our country is around the world militarily.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that way, David. You know, made in England, made in Great Britain is still a brand worth having. The English language is still the lingua franca of the globe, of aviation, of computers, of commerce, and so on. Our culture, I'm just noting with astonishment, it is 50 years ago today that the Beatles recorded You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. I remember it as if it was yesterday. Our culture, our film industry, our literature, our universities, our medical sector, biomedical sector, and so on. These are all still very respected things. So it didn't have to be this way. If we had used Brexit, David, to be an independent country, truly independent country, well, we could have been sitting in a very different place today. Last word to you, Dave.
Exactly what you're saying. I think our country has been pointed in the wrong direction for a very, very long time, and I think it's about time.
Yeah.
Well, it basically has to be stopped.
Yeah, and turned round. We need a new captain on the bridge for that. David in South Wales, thanks very much indeed. Now, the top 5 donors on the website, MOATS.tv, in the last hour are Gavin Foster, Michael Salter, Pekin Platinel, Mark Peter Edwards. And I'm deeply grateful for your generosity, all of you. So please go to the website now, moats.tv, and give anything that you can afford. Otherwise, we won't be able to keep broadcasting twice a week. It's basically as simple as that. Duncan in Dundee, my hometown, wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Duncan.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call. 2 quick points. One of your callers earlier raised the subject of the documentary on BBC Two, Life in a War Zone, Gaza, and you were saying that there'll be complaints coming in. There actually has been complaints, came in, and the BBC have already issued an apology.
What?
It was quite interesting because one of the complainants was Danny Cohen, who used to be a controller of the BBC, who gave a speech a few years back in Israel. And Danny must be a rather fragile type of chap because he said he was more comfortable speaking his mind in Bibi Netanyahu's Israel than he was in his own country in London. So I thought that was interesting.
And have they withdrawn it then? Have they taken it down?
I think they're going to be re-editing it, or they're doing something. I'm not sure, but they're not putting it out as it was originally done by the independent producers.
Unbelievable. I'm speechless, Dunk.
The second point I wanted to make, George, is I was talking to my boy about this call-up today. He's a fit young man of call-up age, but he's out there in California doing his surfing, and he's asked me, well, if there was a callback, would he have to come back? So I put his mind at rest.
Well, I strongly, you know, Americans used to flee the draft and come to Britain. Now you'll be advising your son to avoid the draft and stay in America. That's how crazy things have become. But if I was surfing in California, a beach boy, I'm afraid that it would be a no from me, a hard no from me. But, you know, I have 6 children by the grace of God. 4 of them are way too young to be called up, even in the most extreme circumstances. And my first child is the mother of 5 children, and I'm presuming that even Keir Starmer will not call her up. But I do have a very fine, handsome, tall, and very, very fit 17-year-old son. He is exactly the age group that this general speaking today, who said that Britain will have to reintroduce conscription. My son of 17 years old is exactly the kind of boy that they have in mind. I'd be very surprised if he went, wouldn't you? Thanks, Duncan, in Dundee. Now, as I said, you can leave comments on YouTube by scanning the QR code and leave your comment, as Antonio Cristoforu has. Starmer conscription would raise an army of 7 million, but just like other tyrants in Europe, he will march them to their demise towards Moscow. More dickhead than dictator. And Salvo the German Shepherd, 4399, says the 10% who said yes should volunteer themselves before sacrificing others. And Yasmin Patel says Royal Free is in a Jewish area, so no surprise there. Genocide supporting locals wielded their power while playing the victim. And Neil Curry says a few star jumps, few rounds, dismembered by a drone in a cold field, all for an actor working for a gangster. Brilliant. And Juan Francisco Urusti sends 50 Mexican dollars. Thank you very much, my friend. And he says, send Starmer and Lammy to Ukraine only, and make sure they don't come back. Keep up the good fight, dear GG. Thank you, Juan. Simon from Weaponized News, our resident expert, is on the line. What's happening, Simon?
A great deal, as usual, Mr. Galloway. Greetings to you and to your worldwide audience. And as usual, I'm maintaining my role as the peripheral viewer. And what many people didn't notice, yourself excluded, of course, was that whilst all eyes were focused on the goings-on in Riyadh with the negotiations between just the Russians and just the Americans, there was actually a briefing given by the ambassador of Russia and the ambassador of Belarus to the diplomats gathered at the UN offices in Geneva. And the opening line of the version that was put out by that Russian mission, which doesn't get a lot of publicity, except of your existence in this case, which obviously was just a factual point as opposed to any kind of promotion, they said that the Euro-Atlantic, i.e. NATO, security structure, quote, has collapsed. And they reiterated their offer once again for individual members of Europe to join the new Eurasian security architecture. And after the Russian chap had spoken, the lady from Belarus went on to detail the draft of the Eurasian Charter for Diversity and Multipolarity, which they've been working on for a few months. So in that little speech, which was read out in English on a prepared document, not very well, so the video is a little hard to watch, but people can find the transcript in the post that I put out that you so very kindly retweeted late last night from your ex account, George Galloway. So already 10,000 people have viewed that. And believe it or not, that's 80% of all of the people worldwide who have actually seen that Russian piece of information. So it just goes to show you the influence of MOATS TV, whether for good or bad. And I should also point out, if I may very briefly, that whilst people are offended by the type of comments that are being made by President Trump, both in relation to Ukraine and also in relation to Gaza, his somewhat bombastic delivery style does seem to have panicked the Arabs into coming up with an alternative plan. President Sisi, the general, otherwise known as the dictator of Egypt on certain occasions, has scrambled with the King of Jordan, fresh from his humiliation in Washington, to come up with an alternative scheme. The Egyptian president has cancelled his trip to Washington, and he will be promoting his alternative scheme directly to the combined excellencies of the Gulf Cooperation Council tomorrow, in the hope that they'll be able to persuade Donald Trump to change his mind. So to answer your very astute question, so yes, indeed, there is a lot going on.
Well, this is the Global University of the Airwaves and our resident professor, Simon, from Weaponized News, never fails to elucidate and educate us on the great issues of the day. Thanks, Simon. Zayed is in Watford in England, but wants to talk about Palestine. Let's hear why. Go ahead, Zayed.
Good evening, George, and thank you for taking my call. By the way, I'm Lucas Zade, who posted that message regarding John Nelson Darby, who founded correction, he was actually born in 1800 in Britain, moved to the America, where he founded the what's called the dispensationalist movement that came up with the rapture that was a prerequisite to basically the Christian Zionists. And
thank you.
This is all
very helpful.
Yeah, this is all in an excellent video by Rabbi Tovia Singer on the whole subject and of these Christian Zionism movements and why they support Israel. It's really highly recommended. Now back to the situation with Palestine. I think what's blatantly clear that these American Christian Zionist plans seem to be heading towards they do want to create a state of Palestine, obviously in Jordan, because they keep repeating this mantra that Jordan is Palestine. And Gaza is gone. It's going to turn into a Mogadishu, and the rebuilding is going to go and fail, just like how it did in Iraq, where 90% of the 55 billion was spent on security contractors. So Gaza is gone. But I see that West Bank obviously is next, and I see what's going to happen is that the 3 million Palestinians are going to be expelled to Jordan, which will cause obviously instability in Jordan with the already existing 60% Palestinian population, and will probably recreate a repeat of Black September, where the Palestinians will try and overthrow or succeed in overthrowing King Abdullah of Jordan and declaring a new de facto state of Palestine in Jordan. And I think that's why King Abdullah was probably looked very worried after meeting Trump, and you notice he had his son with him who would take over should anything happen to him. So that was a bit of a hint there. And I think King Abdullah is probably most likely going to go the way that Assad of Syria did, very quickly, and just fleeing the country. What do you think?
Very dramatic call, Zaid. Very dramatic call indeed. And let's hope none of that actually happens, though all of it, pardon me, might. Now, as you know, I've got another show which goes out on Tuesday nights. And last night's was a brilliant show with our good friend, Professor Dan Kovalik. Here is how you can be on the screen on Have It Out with Galloway. Take a look. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Please watch that interview with Dan Kovalek. He's just back from Syria. He very bravely, without any press credentials and without any protection at all, was inside Syria, the new Syria, ruled by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the alphabet soup of extremism. And he has a lot to say about Lebanon also. So that's Have It Out with Galloway on YouTube right now. Now, as it happens, I just picked up today, although I've had it for a very long time, the epic biography by Robert Shelton of Bob Dylan called No Direction Home, in preparation for watching what I hope will be the epic movie of the same name. And up pops John in New York on the Bob Dylan movie. John, welcome. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. This is John. I am a proud student in the Global University, paying tuition monthly on Patreon.
Bravo. Thank you so much, John.
I wanted to recommend the movie Complete Unknown to you and to your audience. There are a few inaccuracies, as there are in most Hollywood productions. I mean, they have to condense 5 years into 2 hours. But I think that the music is phenomenal. And I thought about you watching the film because I said, well, this is a complete change of subject. But in the world today, maybe it's not. And I'm drawn to, when you speak, you often mention Bob Dylan's lyrics. And if any of the listeners would go back and listen to some of these songs, like I know that you always quote Masters, and you're fond of the line, you can't win with a losing hand. These lyrics are very pertinent even today. And I know that I'm 10 years younger than you, so I know that you have experienced more of Dylan. I was just a mere boy, when he was popular in the 60s. Can you reflect on any of that I mentioned in terms of Bob Dylan and the fact that his lyrics are as pertinent today as they were then?
Amen. Well, Shakespeare, he's in the alley with his pointed toes and his curls, talking to some French girls who say they know him well. All of Dylan's lyrics are, if you look at them in the right way, pertinent to many of the things that are happening exactly today, whether it's Brigitte Macron or whether it's the imbroglio going on now in Paris. The truth is that Dylan is the greatest writer since Shakespeare. He is a philosopher king. He is a poet laureate. I have, as you rightly imply, had more opportunities to see him than you, maybe 50 times live. The last time with my good wife in Lisbon, only I think last year. He is the writer and singer of the soundtrack of my life. The greatest performance I ever saw him give was when I was sat right next to the man who is the editor of this show, Ron Mackay. We went to see him in Earl's Court in either the winter of 1977 or early in 1978. It's what I call the Budokan period. And I think his voice and his performances were at their very best on that occasion. But I'd go to see Bob reading out the telephone book, and sometimes I think he actually is nowadays. But any Bob Dylan is worth seeing, and I'm looking forward very much to seeing the movie. Can I just ask you, John, you say the music is good, but it's not Bob, is it? It's the star of the show. I forget his name now, the actor who's doing the singing. How good is he?
The performances by Timothy Chalamet and the actress that plays Joan Baez, I mean, and that's what makes the movie, I think, so great, because they're not lip syncing. They're actually performing the music. And you're experiencing it on the screen. It leaves an impression on you. And I definitely recommend this film to you and to all of my fellow students in the university. And it maybe even go back and revisit and look at, just read the lyrics of the songs on Freewheelin' Bob Dylan or Highway 61 or Blonde on Blonde. Just read the lyrics if you could, and I think it will leave a lasting impression.
Amen. John, you and I should do a podcast on it. I could feel one coming on. John in New York on the Bob Dylan movie, being cut short for only one reason, that my good wife is in the room. Gayatri, what's rattling on social media?
Well, we and many of our audience were all, of course, very shocked when Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a conscription army. Yeah. But only 1 year ago, I don't know if you recall, the British Army General, Sir Patrick Saunders, called upon a citizen army, right? So
I'm up for that. Oliver's army. Let's make a citizens army. What, will you give us permission for that, Sir Keir?
But that was also to fight the Russians. What's more is very interesting. The mayor of London, no less, Sadiq Khan, he met with his fellow mayor of Kiev.
Not the crook, Klitschko.
Vitaly Klitschko, that's right.
The pornography king.
Yeah, former heavyweight champion. He says, yesterday I met Mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, to reaffirm London's support. Ukraine must determine its own future. London stands with Ukraine and the people of Kiev. Hearing their stories in the face of barbaric oppression is a stark reminder of what's at stake.
Wait, what? Sadiq Khan, Sir Sadiq Khan, went to Ukraine at whose expense?
No, actually, he met him in London.
Oh, in London?
Yeah, he met...
So Klitschko's here instead of at the front?
Yes, that's...
Well, of course, his front is a different kind of front to the poor bloody infantry that they're dragging off the street. Well, I mean, these people are doomed. Klitschko is a doomed figure. The next leader of Ukraine will come from its armed forces. Of that, I have no doubt.
So, should the British Army be sent to the Ukraine? A majority is against it. And what you said earlier about Klitschko being in London rather than on the front, Linda Jurgensen says, back in the olden days, if they wanted war, the king and his men went to fight too. What happened to the men? To let the king and his men stay home while the rest of the people go to fight? Not many examples, is there?
I told you about King Charles. I mean, he's got a lot of medals. He must have won them somehow. He's got multiple military uniforms. He can ride a horse. Why doesn't he gallop into the Valley of Death in front of his troops? Of course, even to state that is to make clear how ridiculous that is. These people have never heard a shot in anger. I've told you before, Gayatri, I can strip an SLR, self-loading rifle, with a blindfold on, and I can reassemble it with a blindfold on. I was a lance bombardier in the Royal Army Cadet Force. That means I can fire a mortar. The idea that these people, these powder puffs, these pansies, could go and fight a war is so ridiculous, nobody would even seriously ask them to. It's your son, my son, that they intend to draft. Well, over my dead body, I reiterate it.
Exactly, amen. Dr. Dream says, how in the world does Trump get it, but Starmer doesn't on this one? Starmer keeps getting things horribly wrong. Don't know why he doesn't have the courage to say to Zelensky, Britain has its own issues and we are financially broke. We're on the floor.
There's a great private eye cover where Keir Starmer is saying our people are freezing and hungry and poor and increasingly fretful about the future. And Zelensky says, I'm sorry to hear that, Prime Minister.
Exactly. And here's millions more.
Britain is a basket case. It's going down the drain. Everybody can see it. I mean, Starmer is in 3rd place in the opinion polls. Reform are top, the Tories are 2nd, the government are 3rd. That's how unpopular he is. Although, maybe it's because he's unpopular that he's come up with this wheeze. I don't know what the viewers think of that, whether this would be a popular move, a vote winner or not.
Can't imagine. The thing is that, look, Philip Meek says, as a retired senior British officer stated some months ago, UK troops would be wiped out within a few weeks. Neither are they as well trained as the Russians, or are they battle hardened. And one more thing, neither are they as patriotic as the Russians. And this is something lacking, isn't it, for both the citizen army I raised earlier and this.
Well, I don't want to be disrespectful to our soldiers who have for many centuries displayed valor and martial competency in multiple theatres around the world. Indeed, there's only 24 countries in the entire world that we have not invaded. So we've had plenty of practice at soldiering. But in the last wars that we fought, we were whipped in the Helmand province in Afghanistan, and we were run out of Basra in the south of Iraq under fire. Sure, our paratroopers can kill unarmed Catholic demonstrators on the streets of Derry, but fighting the battle-hardened and extremely well-armoured forces of the Russian Federation is a very different thing from killing unarmed demonstrators in Derry. So I feel that our armed forces should be defending us, should be defending our country, our borders, not Zelensky's. And if we've got 10,000 soldiers to spare, I'll be surprised. I don't know where he's going to get them. Is he going to denude Buckingham Palace of its guard? Because I don't know where he gets 10,000 frontline forces to go there. And if it's not the forces, if he's already walking it back in favour of Royal Air Force Typhoons, some of which we see flying over our house from time to time, then they'll be shot down. They'll be shot down before you can say Jack Robinson. And the bases in Poland from which they're operating will be attacked. Russia isn't fooling about this. Now that Russia's got America on its side, can't you see, you fool, Starmer? Now that Russia's on the same side as America, you are done for. Your goose is cooked. Last word to you, Gayatri. Speaking of goose, are we going out for chips?
Always, without doubt. I've got Nicola Curtin responding on the YouTube chat live saying Oliver Army is my favorite Elvis Costello song. It's about living during the Cold War. It's also my favorite, Nicola. I love that song and I love that album of Elvis Costello.
Do you love the original lyrics? Because you're now not allowed to play the original lyrics because of political correctness.
To our American audience, it's not your Elvis we're talking about. Look up Elvis Costello.
Oh, no.
Oh my God, we saw him. We went to his concert a while back. He's obviously not. He's not sadly performing anymore.
Not much. He's been very poorly, but Elvis Costello had a burst of creativity and productivity of about 10 years in which he produced the best part of 100 brilliant songs, and some of them actually quite sublime, of which Oliver's Army, in its original form, is definitely one. Thanks for that, Gayatri. We'll get our coats and get out for the chips. Let me just summarize the poll. Should the British Army be sent to Ukraine? Well, On Telegram, only 11% said yes. On the YouTube community poll, out of a total of 22,000, only 11% said yes. On the YouTube stream, only 9% said yes. But on X, although this is turned around, only 48% said yes. Now this means that the X platform is boosting the fellas, the NAFO, the pro-Ukrainian people, even though Ukraine is actually openly threatening Elon Musk with death. I'll be meeting Elon Musk in a Dublin courtroom, not that far distant from now. And the irony is that I'll be fighting him and he'll be fighting me whilst both of us are on the same Ukrainian death list. Go figure, as the Americans say. But the overwhelming majority of 37,154 people say no to the British Army being sent to Ukraine. This is a harbinger, Keir Starmer, of the kind of public relations beating that you are going to be taking if you continue with this madcap idea. And I hope very much that you will not be so foolish as to follow through with it. And I hope Donald Trump tells you when you get to Washington, if you get past the gate, if they know who you are, when you and Peter Mandelson, Ambassador Peter Mandelson, slither into the Oval Office, I hope they tell you in no uncertain terms. Britain is in a bad way. The United States seems to have recovered some elan, some sense of purpose, some sense of national unity, some sense of a new beginning. And we can only envy them. Even though we are not Trump supporters here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we were with Dr. Jill Stein and would be again. We have to envy the people of the United States who at least are sweeping away the old. What the new will look like remains to be seen. But I like this dodge, this D-O-G-E, that is sweeping, cutting through and exposing grand larceny of the American people in so-called USAID. And I'm launching tonight my own campaign for a similar operation to be created in Britain. In our case, it will be called DOSH, D-O-S-H, Department of State Honesty. Now, wouldn't that be a fine thing? It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back with another viewer. Why don't you? At the next show, which is on Sunday. But all the time, we're spreading our influence across the English-speaking world. And God bless you all for all of your support for us. See you on Sunday, God willing.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.